This time we'll dive a bit into one of my favorite topics, bicycle and transit integration, but also zoom out into more multimodal lessons. And connectivity is key, I can already tell you that. So nice to meet again. That's me cycling in a train. That's not allowed, by the way. This is also not a real train, but I think it expresses well what I'm doing as a researcher and also the projects we are doing. Trying to understand how multimodality works, that's our core focus, and then trying to implement that in planning, in policy, in models to actually use the knowledge in practice and actually make a difference in the end in our multimodal system. So if we start to talk about public transport, and there's a lot of enthusiasm, I think, in this room for public transport, including me, but we should also be aware that planning public transport is not easy. And although we would like to connect every origin and destination by a direct line, I think we're all aware that's impossible because of multiple reasons. So we always are balancing travel times and comfort versus operational cost and investment cost. So we always have this puzzle of bundling, both in time. We don't offer continuous public transport. We have frequencies, headways, and also not in space. We need to bundle. And because of this, we need to, and because of this, connectivity is key. Smooth transfers, of course, you want to offer as much as possible direct connections, but transfers are not to be avoided. So make sure that you plan for it. And for this is not only about trains. This is about trains, this is about buses, this is about bicycles, shared mobility, the whole set, to actually deal with the challenge of the left to make happen on the right. This is an example from the late 90s in the Netherlands. The upper picture, you saw a bus line network in yellow, and we also had a train network there, black and white, classic railway line, I think. And in those days, and this is from the east of the Netherlands, a regional transport system. And as you can see, it was not connected at all. Both companies were competing actually instead of collaborating for multiple reasons. Also, the governance structure was inviting for this kind of developments. But happily, we have one of the godfathers, I think, of the Dutch public transport industry is Frank van Zetten, who is used to be a strategic planner, a manager of an operator, but also a train driver, as you can see here. And actually, he introduced this synchronized, connected networks in the east of the Netherlands, where all these networks are connected. And all these lines here, bottom lines, are networks in itself. So this train line is also a network. These buses connecting to the train stations are also a network. So there's a layer structure of networks, but core thing is that they all are connected. And also the governance structure, as I said in my first talk, is facilitating this because the regional authority is actually in charge of both this railway network and the buses and beyond. So I think that's an important thing to consider. And also important to consider, I think we discussed it already a couple of times here as well with the people. Most people don't live at the station or work at the station, so they need to go to a station, and also they need to have transport afterwards. The first and the last mile, and often it's actually a bit longer than a mile here and there. Public transport is good at bringing people from station to station in high density, space efficient. I think that's important, but it's not so strong in this first and last mile connection. And that's why we need to team up with all these other kinds of modes. It's the bicycle, it's the e-scooter, but it's also the bus, and it's also walking, let's not forget. We are doing a lot of research in that direction, also going to start with the passengers. What do the passenger want? What do they prefer? What would they choose if? And one of the things we did in our campus was also invite them with all these new emerging modes. We have the e-scooters and self-driving cars and shuttles. And we asked them in multiple combinations, what would you prefer? And what this pie chart is showing, there's a market for all these modes. So I would go for the whole mix to make your public transport very good accessible. But what this graph also shows is that although these high-tech modes, most people still prefer the traditional bicycle. And that's not only in the Netherlands, maybe we're a bit biased there, but I think that's also for other countries. So let's not forget about all these new modes and the e-scooters and everything, but let's not forget about the simplicity maybe of the bicycle, because bicycle is king. This we discussed in the first presentation as well. When I talk about bicycle and transit integrating, I'm not talking about taking your bike on board. Imagine that all Dutch people would do so. We don't have any space anymore. Actually, we need 20 times longer trains to get all the bikes in there. I think it's a good step towards a good bicycle transit integration, that you take your bike on board and that you facilitate this. But at some point, if you're very successful, you should go for parking at the station and offering shared bikes, for instance, at the other end. So I'm talking mostly about the upper part. So we like to brag a bit about how cool we are, how good we are doing. So a couple of numbers here. What's happening? If you don't want to listen to the latter part of my presentation of 50 minutes, you can also go to a YouTube video of 4 minutes, saves you a lot of time. You also meet some other experts from the Netherlands. But one of the things here which I think is key, I mentioned connectivity is key with regard to modes, but also urban planning and transport should be well aligned. I think we all agree. Also in the Netherlands we all agree, but still we see separated departments, separated institutes, and it all starts with proper planning. I don't know whose quote it is, but the best public transport planning is actually urban planning. If you start well, if you start with people already being in the catchment areas of your stations, you already have a very good start. If we zoom in a bit of this combination, as I said, public transport is doing well if it comes to fast, reliable, comfortable transport from station to station. But it's also obvious that it's not so flexible, which is actually one of the benefits and core strengths of the bicycle. So if you integrate them well, which is not easy, but we'll come back to that, you can actually combine the best of both worlds. If you take the advantage of one and take the advantage of others. But be careful, as I said, it's not easy to start with. And if you do it wrong, you might actually combine the worst of both worlds, which obviously is not what you want. Also today, I think we already heard, and I'm very happy to hear, that transport planning is not only about mobility and bringing people from A to B. Yes, that's the core business, but I think a well-planned and a well-executed public transport system can actually contribute to many other goals you also may strive for. For instance, livability of cities. We were discussing in the break about examples of good cities in Europe. I personally like France in that perspective because they use their light rail systems, they use their BRT system, bus systems, not only to improve their mobility systems, but actually to completely renew their cities to make it more livable and space efficient. So we developed, based on our research on light rail worldwide, we developed this 5E model because we found good public transport comes with a price. You need to justify your investments. If you're not crystal clear about your contributions, about the why of it, probably you will, at some point in the political discussion, you will fail. And that's also what we saw in many light rail projects, many transport projects all over the world. You need to be clear what your contributions are. And that's more than those, and that's why we developed this 5E. It's about livability, as I said, efficient cities. It's about economy, boosting the economy by proper accessibility. It's about the environment, also health, by the way. We would like to add there, obesitas is becoming a worldwide problem. I think public transport and active mobility could actually contribute there, saving you a lot of health costs later on, other department, other ministry, but be aware. And last but not least, equity, as I discussed with my previous presentation, with inclusive mobility. Again, it's not up to us to say to politicians or to you what you should do, but be aware that there is much more. And in our research agenda, we try actually to find out what the contribution of public transport is when you make specific choices in your design. If you integrate public transport and cycling well, obviously also you improve your access and egress. The total door-to-door, as Mark mentioned, is also improved. But not unimportant, actually you can also improve the efficiency of your public transport system. It's not only benefiting the passengers or the society, it's actually also very good for you as a public transport company because your networks could actually be designed much more efficient, meaning less cost, more passengers. Who doesn't want it? And that has to do with these principles of network designs. I can give you a lecture, no worries, I won't do it. But there's a couple of principles you can follow when designing public transport. You can go for the top one, which has a lot of stops, which is very great for accessibility, but it's also very slow. And slow public transport is in general by most passengers not appreciated and is also costly because if your public transport is slow, it will take a lot of buses to make a high frequency system. If you go for the bottom one, it's fast, which actually is what most passengers like, and it's also cheaper. With the same bus or tram or train, you can actually make more cycles, so you can actually increase the frequency for the same price, so to speak, which passengers appreciate. But obviously, the less stops and the lower line density, the longer the access and egress towards these stops are. And for some people, let me be clear, that's hard. So if you want to have an inclusive system, I would always go for a double layered one. But if you want to have an efficient system, I would focus more on that one. But having another one to also service the people that cannot join. Because all the other people actually, they can, and this is where the bicycle jumps in, that can actually deal with these longer distances to and from the stop. Obviously, if you cycle the same amount of time, you can actually serve a longer distance, that's clear, and that's quite substantial if you see here. So your catchment areas are increased substantially. But catchment areas are not static. Often in transport models and in discussions, we always think 400 meters or whatever. That's nice for a guideline, but be aware that these catchment areas are actually depending on many factors, the passengers' preferences, but also about the quality of service. And that's what we, for instance, see here if we look at the access on top and the egress from Dutch public transport systems. On the left, we have the national railways. On the right, we have bus, tram, metros. People are more willing to cycle to a train station in general than to a bus stop, because what is offered there is of a higher quality, longer distance, higher speed, etc. So that's important. If we make it a bit more tangible even, what we did in Amsterdam 10 years ago when we started our research on bicycle transit integration, we looked at how do people cycle to local buses versus how do they cycle to high-level buses, BRT or buses with high level of service, high frequency, high reliability, etc. And that's what you see here. On top, you see that 90% of the people are willing to cycle up to 1,700 meters. But if you're offering a high level of service, they're actually willing to cycle almost double the size, which means that your catchment area increase almost 4 times. And that's an important lesson when designing public transport. It's not about designing public transport and after it's designed, you ask the cycling guys to integrate. You have to do it at the same time, at the same moment, because it actually makes a difference how you design the public transport and how you integrate it with active mobility. And here you see the impact. It makes quite a difference if you look at the accessibility of a specific area, whether you have these smaller versus these larger catchment areas. That's an easy story, but obviously it's not easy to integrate it. Also for us, it's not easy. It's a daily challenge, I think, to well manage and operate and plan. We did a large study on all the factors that could play a role. A few weeks ago, I was invited in Dubai to talk about this. They have about 50 degrees in summer. Not sure if cycling is then the best opportunity. However, when I was there, it was 20 degrees on an e-bike. It's still comfortable. But let's not be naive. The weather, the hilliness, there's many factors you should take into account. I think the e-bike, by the way, is a game changer in that sense, dealing with much of them. And also there, what we discussed also when we were in Dubai, maybe this is not an option for 4 or 5 months a year. Also in the Netherlands, I'm not very keen on to cycle when it rains or when it's snowing. That doesn't mean that I won't cycle when the opportunities are better. So it's also not about 100% or nothing in that sense. You also see a lot of other aspects. The culture is very important. I also was with the Dutch Cycling Embassy in India at some point. People don't appreciate cyclists. That's a cultural thing. So that takes a while to get there. You won't be Amsterdam in a day or two. Be aware of it, but make steps and start with the important things. And I think when talking about integration, it's about safe routes towards the public transport stops and well-designed, sufficient, high-quality parking. I would say that's the first thing to start with. And to be honest, safety we tend to forget in the Netherlands because it's already quite safe. And then, yes, we appreciate, but if you ask us what's more important, probably we won't tell it because we actually don't consider it anymore. One of the other challenges is the last mile, as we discussed, because most people don't have a vehicle available there, and sometimes the distances could be long. This is a concept by the Dutch Railways, OV Fiets, the public transport bike, the blue-yellow bikes. If you're in the Netherlands in the city, you will see them. I think this is the best innovation we ever had in public transport. And it's actually not a public transport vehicle, it's a bicycle. It's very convenient. You can use your smart card, which is, by the way, nationwide, valid on all public transport. You can use it to unlock the bike, to lock it again, bring it back to the station. You see some numbers here. We're very proud of it. And every year in a newspaper, there's this standard headline, OV fiets again beat the record of last year. It's going up and it's going up. I think it's a very good concept. I think the biggest challenge, also looking at Mark from the Dutch Railways, is availability. If you're too late, there's no bike anymore. We want to invest this. What's the value? Thinking about the 5 E's. What is actually the contribution of integrating public transport and shared bicycles? So one of our students, Watetu Mabuga, she did a research of 20 years of costs and benefits of the OV fiets. And also there, if you want to learn more, also Chris will tell more about OV fiets. 20 years ago, it wasn't considered a success product, but now it is. So there was quite a development there. She investigated in the cost and the benefits in the wider sense, and she found out, as you can see here, even in the most pessimistic scenario, because as you might hear, we are a bit biased, but we're researchers, so we should be careful. We did pessimistic, optimistic scenarios, and in all of them, you see the number is higher than 1, implying that the benefits are higher than the cost. So societally seen, this is a very good efficient investment as a society. And this is in the Netherlands, where there's already a quite heavy cycling culture. Imagine in other cities where there's still much more to gain in cycling in general. I am sure that these benefits are even more higher. It will take time. Patience is very important, but I think the societal business case is clear. And these are related to accessibility, but for instance also to health and travel times. Last part of the presentation, I said connectivity is key. Mark mentioned that experience is also an important part. So mobility hubs are a new trend in transport land, so to speak. And I think they are very potential, but be aware that there's also experience involved there. If it's only connecting a bus and a bike, there should be sufficient provision of mobility, including shared mobility or whatever you're operating, but also the experience, the facilities you're offering that could be sheltered to start with, could also be parcel lockers, an ATM, maybe a shop, a place where you can buy some coffee. Depending on the level of hubs you're looking at, are we looking at a central station where the bus and the trains are smoothly connected? Or are we looking at a neighborhood hub where only shared mobility and maybe a shared car is shared? Also here in Rotterdam, you see these smaller neighborhood hubs. You should combine the mobility aspects and also here connectivity, urban planning, and mobility go hand in hand. Obvious, but not so obvious in policy domain, is why are we actually making hubs? We did a research to find out, and I think in 10 to 20% of the cases, the reason to have a hub was to have a hub. Everyone is talking about hubs. I also want a hub there. That's nice to say, but it's not so smart in your policy developments. But be clear, also here, what do you want to achieve? What is the hub contributing to? We talked about the 5 E's already. There's multiple reasons why you can actually invest in a hub, but be clear, because it will cost effort, it will cost money, so you be patient. If you're not clear about the why, probably you won't get there. Be sure about the why, and also, in line with the data I mentioned at the beginning, make sure to monitor what's happening. If it's not a success, make it a success. If it isn't a success, be good and tell it. Last but not least, who are the users of the hub? That's quite different in the city. What kind of people are actually living in the neighborhood you are aiming at? We did this research in Almere, which is obviously not the same as Amsterdam people-wise. What do they want? They are not all into bakfiets, cargo bikes or everything. They want other things at their hubs. So it's very important to start with the passenger preferences. I really liked the discussion, the roundtable, the point of the female users. Make sure that we don't not only talk about them, but include them in the design already. Make sure that your end users are in your design, and you probably will end up with a very inclusive design. And there's no standard, there's no default for every hub. Make sure that it's tailor-made towards the need. To wrap up, multimodality, if we're talking connectivity is key, urban planning and transport, but also all these modes Let's not go for a battle of the modes, but let's find the optimal mix of them. It's not easy to integrate. It's much easier to not do it. That's much simpler. But obviously, if you have specific goals, I think you need to. And mobility hubs, I think, are a very good, visible way to deal with it. Happy to share more, answer your questions. If you want more about the research I was showing, every slide is probably almost related to a paper or two. If you want to know more, we have everything online for your convenience, but also happy to answer your questions now or later.
Hello, Gregor from the Ministry. I have two questions. First, you have this integration of OFEs. That is a part of the price of the ticket, or you have to pay extra? So you have to pay extra, but you can pay with the ticket that you're using for public transport.
Yeah, you can pay with your smart card. So that's how you tap in, tap out in the trains and the bus and everything. But you have to pay extra for the bike, which is nowadays $4.80 or something. And that's also one of the challenges or the complaints. It's relatively expensive. You don't use this on a daily basis, but that's how it is.
Okay. And the second question, you said is accessibility in the catchment area. How do you, as a public transport authority, deal with the municipalities or the cities that are managing the roads in the surrounding of the stations? Because in my opinion, it's always waiting time on a red light, entering to the station is really a burden for those who are trying to have a...
Yeah, I think that's an important interface. I just hear that Herbert will also discuss about it is in his talk, so we will continue on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. My question is related to increase of cyclists in the Netherlands. It's already huge. You didn't mention what is about the safety. I understand that also the safety of bicycles is now #1 in the Netherlands. And second, recently I read an article that Utrecht is abandoning roundabouts for safety of bicycles. Cyclists too. Thank you.
I'm not sure about the second one. Herbert is here from the region, so he maybe answered that one. Regarding the first one, as I said, I think most people in the Netherlands, they are not bicycle fans, by the way. We just do it. Even if you're a car lover or whatever, you're not making a statement by cycling. And I think it's very safe. Our children also, many of them go to school. I have a son of 8 who is also cycling already for 2 years with me, but going to school. But I'm not sure what you meant, but there is some debate nowadays about safety, especially with the introduction of new fat bikes, e-bikes, high speeds on our streets. I'm not sure if you're... And the discussion about helmets, I'm not an expert there, maybe Chris can say a few words. The only thing I always say, if you start to talk about helmets with Dutch people, you will end up in a very sensitive discussion. I'm a cyclist myself. I'm not eager to wear a helmet, to be honest.
Thank you very much. We will have a circle later on.
Yeah, cool.
Welcome to join us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Round of applause, please.